In my last video, I talked about the fact that getting lightsabers right is going to be critical to the success of Star Wars Eclipse. The lightsaber is so ingrained in the mythos of the Star Wars universe that when we see them, we recognise the legend that we've witnessed across 45 years of the franchise, and we expect to be in awe of it. Understanding the lightsaber, not only as a weapon, but as an icon as well, is to understand the Jedi and the Sith, and why they were such dominant religions in the galaxy. But it's not often people look at them that way. You could be sitting there watching and thinking, my blade is blue, I understand this weapon. But the truth is you don't. It's such a complex thing when you really get into it. And actually, blade colour seems to be vague or inaccurate for a lot of our favourite Jedi. And it's because personality is a matrix of nuance, subtlety. Those subtleties, for the most part, aren't captured in the colour of one's blade, but they are in the hilt. So, this is Lightsabers Explained Part 1, the hilt. The lightsaber hilt is the critical component in the weapon chain. It houses the Kyber crystal, refines and focuses the energy for the blade, and it's the wielder's point of contact with the weapon. The hilt pretty much is the lightsaber at its conceptual level. Typically, a hilt is made up of 6 major component families: a chassis, a pommel, a crystal chamber, a switch, a grip sleeve, and an emitter. The chassis is the base frame for the hilt. The pommel cap typically serves as a counterbalance for the full hilt and blade, while also enclosing the end of the hilt. The crystal chamber quite simply is the housing for the Kyber crystal. The switch plate is the area where the major controls can be found, such as the activation stud or blade length adjustment wheel. The grip sleeve, or sleeves, is the area most favourable to hold the sabre, oftentimes having contours and grooves to improve the tactility of the weapon. And finally is the emitter, or the emitter matrix, which consists of a projector plate and focusing lenses that actually define the shape and the width of the lightsaber blade. Hilts come in various different shapes, sizes, and styles as well. The standard lightsaber hilt is similar to European greatswords, with a long, straight form, and is typically designed for either hand and a half or two-handed grips. The standardization of this simple design is due to its simplicity to learn with and to use proficiently. A staff hilt, also known as a saber staff, employs a second blade with a longer hilt to allow for balance, counterbalance, spinning, and hinging when in use. This style was favoured by those with a need for greater defensive and counter-offensive abilities, as it lends itself well to blocking blaster fire and lightsaber strikes, or intimidating and simultaneously dueling multiple opponents. The pike hilt, or saber pike, is defined by having a very long hilt relative to blade size, and is more akin to a spear than a saber or a sword. The hilt is separated into a functional pole and a control module. The pole typically would be used stylistically to manipulate the blade end through complex, far-reaching strikes, or to maintain a safe distance from an opponent by outreaching more conventional lightsabers. The control module, typically located towards the very end of the pole, comprises the major components of the lightsaber itself, with the crystal chamber, emitter matrix, and power cells being housed within. This style of weapon is typically favoured by guards or those with custodial responsibilities, as seen with the Swiss Guard or the Jedi Temple Guards. The crossguard lightsaber is likely the most unconventional hilt style, as it poses a very real risk to the user if dueling another lightsaber wielder. It's broadly similar to the standard lightsaber, albeit wider, heavier, and less elegant. The major difference is the presence of laterally orientated beams perpendicular to the main blade. In Kylo Ren's lightsaber, they were a functional design to bleed off excess energy from the cracked Kyber crystal that it employed. In Stellan Gios' case, they were employed as a defensive aid, providing protection to the hand similar to the quillons on a longsword or the basket of a rapier. This variation fell out of favour with the Jedi, but not with the Sith, likely due to the fact that it lends itself to lightsaber-on-lightsaber combat. Exhaust-style hilts such as Ren's could burn the user if a lock occurs in a duel. It's more effective when the main blade is used to overpower blaster or archaically armed opponents. This is the hilt of a weapon of domination and conquest, used by the Jedi in the campaigns to eliminate Sith strongholds, such as Malachor, or by Kylo Ren to intimidate and dispatch the locals on Mustafar. One of the less common hilt styles is the broad saber. It's characterized by a flatter profile compared to the cylindrical hilts of conventional sabers. It famously produced a large, flat blade. This is achieved with a square or rectangular emitter matrix, as opposed to the circular or elliptical shape of standard blades. The main benefit of this hilt is for dueling. A flat blade means that there are only 2 edges by which strikes can be made, meaning a more direct and intense system of attack, and allowing the user to make use of edge alignment to control a duel. The dark saber, probably the most famous broad saber, is often employed this way. This comes at a cost, however, as the flat blade loses the benefit of the standard round blade. With a circular blade, there are infinite edges, infinite angles of defense and attack, infinite options to orientate the weapon and still mount an attack or a defense. It's the hilt selection for offensive duelists, who rely on high intensity and control to win in combat against another lightsaber wielder. While possible with enough skill and focus, it's not well suited against ranged attacks or blaster fire. The curved hilt, like the broadsaber, is a dueling style of hilt. It works on the same premises of using unconventional angles and fast movement as the broadsaber, while retaining the infinite edge potential of the standard lightsaber. Famously employed by some of the more talented duelists in the galaxy, such as Asajj Ventress and Ahsoka Tano, it is perhaps most masterfully used by the eponymous Count Dooku, whose skill with this particular hilt style was unrivaled by nearly all other users of any other hilt style. If one expects to be fighting against other lightsaber wielders, one would do well to employ and master a curved hilt. The cane hilt lightsaber, or simply the cane saber, is a more clandestine refinement of a standard lightsaber that incorporates added functionality to the weapon. By merit of fitting into a walking implement, this weapon doubles up as a subtle feint, creating the illusion of feebleness as a walking stick, but quickly deploying a lethal implement that can shock and overpower unprepared opponents. Most useful for one that wishes to conceal the fact that they're armed, as seen with Terra Sinube, who could navigate the unpredictable underworld of Coruscant largely unnoticed, while retaining the option of deploying a weapon should the need arise for it. The Shoto hilt is, rather simply, a short and standard hilt. It could be utilised in the same way as the more standard hilt for users of a shorter stature, such as Master Yoda, or as an auxiliary blade for taller users. Ahsoka Tano made use of a Shoto hilt across all three incarnations of her lightsabers, the Shoto complementing her agile, explosive technique, and covering her following side while the larger, leading hand saber took up the brunt of the workload. The Great Saber, also known as the Light Club, is, like the Shoto, critically linked to the height of the wielder. For users with a naturally imposing stature, such as Wookiees, Trandoshans, and Besalisk, a larger, heavier hilt was actually more intuitive than struggling to maintain the fine dexterity required to master an undersized hilt. The Great Saber is characterized by being longer, wider, heavier, and apparently unwieldy by those in a standard height class, between 5 and 6 feet. It's somewhat mockingly known as a club, as the weight and size is often incorrectly assumed to be clumsy. For a Wookiee or a Trandoshan, with the training, these weapons can be just as fast and just as dangerous as any other lightsaber hilt. So we've established that the shape and size of your hilt will depend on how you plan on using the weapon, but then there is a manner in which it's constructed. Not all Jedi or Sith were fond of using the lightsaber, and many of them took to using them as more of a symbolic instrument than a weapon. Master Architect Hu Yang would tell you that there are 3 distinct attitudes within the construction of one's hilt: practical, plural, and aesthetical. Practical designs are typically those that are the most reliable as a weapon. These hilts are purpose-driven, optimized for the manner in which they'll be used. If you look at Darth Vader's lightsaber, for example, it's very simple in design, and very effective in combat. Ki-Adi-Mundi is another one who kept his lightsaber as utilitarian as possible. It wasn't a work of art or a status symbol, it was a weapon, and it only needed to be as much. By and large, practical hilts feature knurling or serrations in the grip to increase tactility, blocky or jarring protrusions to house essential mechanisms, and simple yet effective covers and shrouds. Practical designs will use very basic materials and components, but within their simplicity there is strength, durability. These are often the hallmarks of intelligent, methodical individuals who measure themselves by their talents and their accomplishments, not by their wealth or status within a hierarchy. They are unconcerned with politics and flights of fancy. They use the lightsaber to focus their power in the Force, and rely on the hilt to be rugged and sensible so as not to distract them from the task at hand. Designing one's hilt in a practical manner is indicative of someone who is not only effective with it, but successful. They are the pragmatic but decisive warriors and negotiators who lead from the front and always get the job done. At the opposite end of the spectrum are the aesthetical hilts, designs that oftentimes are more a work of art than they are a weapon. They are all striking, intricate, and elegant, better suited to projecting one's power, accomplishments, and status than they are to combat. These are the lightsabers of those that have all but outgrown the need to use one. Darth Sidious, Darth Revan, Tar Vizsla. These lightsabers are as beautiful as they are effective, oftentimes limiting the variety and dexterity that they can be used with. Oftentimes these designs are as sleek and smooth as possible, rarely featuring grip serrations and protrusions from the hilt. In particular, Sheev Palpatine's lightsaber embodies the aesthetical architecture. The materials are expensive, rare, and elegant, short like a Shoto, but stout and hefty like a standard hilt. He felt as though he was in fact so qualified and so confident in his mastery of the Force that the lightsaber was his last resort. Easily concealed, but flawlessly crafted, it's more for an artisan, not a warrior. These hilts are a manifestation of the wealth, power, influence, skill, and taste of the builder. The hilts of artisans, artists, courtesans, politicians, and monarchs, aesthetical hilts have an owner, not a wielder. Finally are those hilts that are plural in their design. Quite simply, these hilts are designed with plural machinations, a dual intent. They combine the beauty and expense of aesthetical design with the patent utility of practical design. Count Dooku and Mace Windu are probably the best examples from the two sides of the Force. These are weapons first and foremost, and have been through several iterations, modifications, and refinements to become the perfect complement to the user's method and power. But once they've achieved that, once they've constructed the perfect design for them, the pinnacle of personal armament, they chose to accentuate the design with reflections of their success. They may streamline the hilt and feature a balance of practical components and artistic decoration. Often done in a limited manner so as not to appear overzealous or gaudy, use of finer materials or decorative components is common. These are hilts not of a soldier, but of a general. Not of the monarch, but the master. Not just a weapon, but a symbol as well. The materials chosen in the construction of one's lightsaber are myriad, and subject to the preference and requirements the user expects the hilt to meet. Strength, rigidity, and durability are all considerations when selecting a lightsaber material, but the same with the actual design of the components, aesthetic considerations are also common. Gunji, for example, opted for a grip sleeve fashioned from the wood of the brylark tree, something to remind him of his home, the trees of Kashyyyk. The most practical materials are also the most common. This is likely due to the teachings and beliefs of the Jedi, the most extant users of lightsabers in the galaxy. The most common materials that are inherently practical are things like chromium, duraplast, and various alloys and metallic composites. More aesthetically focused materials are more common among Sith and high-level Jedi. This is likely due to the intrinsic link between egotism and material value. The Sith covet power, and high-ranking Jedi achieve a social influence within the Order, which in their mind qualifies them to enjoy access to more prestigious and privileged items. Materials such as electrum, dolovite, and even wood to a certain extent would be chosen more for aesthetic reasons as opposed to practical ones. For example, electrum was very rare and hugely expensive, and its use was actually restricted by the Jedi to be used exclusively by masters due to its cost and rarity. It was, however, used heavily by both Darth Sidious and Jedi Master Mace Windu because of the connotations of the precious metal. When examining the materials used in a lightsaber's construction, we can really get a sense of the attitudes and beliefs of the user, whether they see value in having a lightsaber that's visually striking, financially valuable, and unique or not. This is something I'd like to look at in depth and to examine the various lightsaber hilts we've seen in the universe to see if we can learn anything more about their users. If that's something you'd be interested in, let me know in the comments. In summary, the lightsaber hilt is probably the most important component of the lightsaber. A lot of fans, and a lot of Star Wars YouTubers too, spend a lot of time on the importance, the significance, or the meaning of the colour of a lightsaber, or rather the colour of the blade. But there wouldn't be a blade without a hilt, and each hilt is tentatively constructed and then pored over and modified and refined by its user throughout their lifetime. Each hilt is the product of decades of experience and change. It houses the Kyber crystal, restricts and controls the blade, and when called upon, it's the handle which Jedi and Sith hold on to and make the choice to preserve life or take it. Now, of course, there is more to the lightsaber than the hilt. That hilt will produce a blade, and the wielder will need to be comfortable with the hilt and blade to use it proficiently, but it is a package. The hilt is where we see the personal orientations of the Jedi and Sith that we love. The meaning of individual blade colours is more generalised and vague, but we're also going to look deeper at the meanings and connotations of blade colours in part 2, and reveal some secrets about some of your favourite Jedi, and why they aren't the pure-hearted heroes that we might think. If you've enjoyed this, go and watch Lightsabers Explained part 2. I also want to know who you think has the best lightsaber design in Star Wars, so let me know that down in the comments. And while you're there, let me know what your lightsaber would look like. The style, the components, the material. If you're new here, I also just want to say welcome to the Star Wars Observer. Really glad to have you. And if you've enjoyed this video, join the community by subscribing, because we've got lots more to come and I want to hear from you guys. See you soon.